Hi everybody, this is Alice Bejeweled Hedgehog, and this is a video response to Xanda, Intarisapurl, and I am responding to your question on Tuesday. I saw your video and you asked the question, what started your love of books and what are some of the books you loved in your childhood? And I love reading so much. I wanted to not only talk about books, but I wanted to show you some books, which is why you're getting a video response instead of just a comment. I'm actually going to have a stack of books here I'm going to show. I don't even remember the earliest books. My father read to me because he was also a reader. Most of the time, my earliest memories are of him sitting in his chair. He had a very big, substantial wooden rocking chair with thick, heavy arms, and that was his chair. When he would come home from work, he would sit in it and relax and read. He was a little older than the average father. He was 40 when I was born, and so he was not a terribly active father, but he did read to me. And I will show you one of the very first books that was ever read to me. It's called The Seven Wonderful Cats. Now this is not the exact copy because the original Seven Wonderful Cats was read to pieces, literally disintegrated, and it was also bigger. It was apparently a giant size version of this book, but it's the same book. It had these adorable pictures of cats in it. Which probably is what started my lifelong love and fascination of cats. And it's a story about a woman named Dame Wiggins of Lee, and she has these 7 wonderful cats, and they live with her, and she sends them to school, and all the wonderful things that they do. And then one of her little lambs gets lost. Well, not her little lamb, but a shepherd's little lamb gets lost. And they rescue it and take care of it. And there's a picture of the little lamb being rescued right there. And in bed, being tended to and looked in on by one of the 7 wonderful cats. So, one of the stories that he used to tell was he would be very tired. He would sit in his chair and he would start to read 7 Wonderful Cats, or really recite 7 Wonderful Cats. And very early on, I learned when he was just sort of reciting off the top of his head and forgetting to turn the pages. And I would thump him on his chest, and he would realize he was out of sync and start turning pages again. And then the other thing he would do when he was reading all these children's books, for like the 1,000,000th time, is he would start to nod off and fall asleep. And so I would thump, 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 and he would wake up again and start reading. And he always smelled a little bit like tobacco because he was from the South, and he had this southern habit of chewing tobacco, which I was not so thrilled with when I grew up, because if you've ever seen somebody that chews tobacco, they have to spit. And it used to embarrass me to no end when, my father would spit. But he had this little packet of tobacco he always carried in his shirt pocket. I think the brand was called Mail Pouch or something. Anyway. Okay, and my mother, although she was never a reader, she never read for fun. She read for information a great deal. She would read on a topic like gardening or health, but she was never a reader of novels or entertainment. But she believed that it was good to read to children, so she read to me also. And I think that is what inspired the love of it, the fact that I was read to, and that I saw my father enjoying it. It was a day-to-day activity, and I just assumed that was what everybody did. Then I got older, older meaning, I was no longer a baby, but I had these terrible sleep problems. I was the child from hell that did not sleep, and I pretty much taught myself to read. I'm sure they helped me, But, you know, I honestly barely remember even learning. It's like I always knew from the beginning, because I would have these huge empty stretches of night with nothing to do, people just laying down and breathing funny and refusing to play with me from my perspective. So that's when I became a reader. And some of my childhood books have actually survived. Here is an Easter book. There was a company that used to make pretty holiday magazines called Ideals. And I know we had some of the Christmas ideals at Christmas. I had this Easter book at Easter, and it had has the cutest pictures in it. I'm not going to make you sit through this page by page, but one of the, I mean, they have these gorgeous illustrations in them. I used to love to look at them for hours. They have poems about spring and Easter and fairies, and I used to adore this picture. The poem is called The Dinky Bird, and it's just, the picture to me was magical. I can remember staring at it for hours. Let me just show you another. Look at these bunnies and their little bunny candy factory, I guess. So this is one of the original books, and yes, there are flowers drying out of it. I mean, dried flowers falling out of it, because for reasons I really cannot remember. Ew, now they're on the floor. Now I have to vacuum. I went crazy with flower pressing for a while and pressed them in that book. Okay, another book that I adore. The illustrations are so cute. I don't know if you can even get these anymore. This one is called Miss Susie, and the author is Miriam Young, pictures by Arnold Lobel, and it was Parents Magazine Press. Parents Magazine had a children's book club that my mother subscribed to for a while, you know, as an easy way of getting books, kids' books, without having to, you know, go out to the store all the time and get them. And Miss Susie is a wonderful little mouse. She has a wonderful little house and a wonderful little life. And one day a band of evil red squirrels come, chase her out of her little house, and she ends up going into the attic of an old house and finding a dollhouse. And she moves in, and it's dirty and dusty, and she cleans it all up, and finds a box of toy soldiers. Oh, they're the toy soldiers. And befriends them and takes care of them. And they march home with her. Here they are, all angrily marching. And they drive out the bad red squirrels, and Miss Susie has her home again. And there she is at the very end in her little tree, and I just adored this. I also adored one called Miss Twiggy and Her Tree, but that, I think, was one that was just kind of loved to death. I had this book of nursery rhymes, and nursery rhymes are not all that impressive per se, but I love the illustrator. The illustrators of this one are Janet and Anne Graham Johnson. Look at all these beautiful fairies and a little pan. And they just have some of the most gorgeous and amazing pictures. I also had that classic Mother Goose edition. The one that has like every Mother Goose rhyme ever written in it. And you know, the pen and ink, the ink and watercolor drawings in it. So, yeah, I had a lot of books. Anyway, these are just great illustrators, great illustrations. And let's see. I loved fairy tales, too, as a kid. And this is one of my first fairy tale books, Grimm's Fairy Tales. It's very simplistic. But, you know, I loved the pictures and loved the book. And then this one is a child's book of poems. And I also have one called A Child's Garden of Verses. And what makes this one special is not so much the actual writings in it, but the illustrator. I loved these pictures. And it's a Japanese illustrator called Gaio Fujikawa. And he did a lot of kids' books back in the 60s and 70s. And again, just a gorgeous, gorgeous illustrator. Can you see the cat there? I'm trying to get it centered. Ah, there we go. Now you can see the cat. And the way he drew children was kind of cute and funny looking too. Children with a swan on a lake under a tree. So these are some of the actual books that survived. And these were all from, like really early days, early grade school days. And yes, even back in the day when I was a child, we still had scholastic books. And this is the only surviving one of my scholastic books. And if I riffle through it, you can see that the pages are pretty much falling out. I'm holding the spine to keep them from dropping out. This is probably a book that I got back in first grade and loved it. Then the last of the stack of books that I've got would be my Raggedy Ann books. And when I went back to read Raggedy Ann to my nieces, it was so goody two-shoes, it drove me nuts. I sort of paraphrased it. But as a kid, I didn't notice that, and I loved it. I had Raggedy Ann and the Magic Book. This was just the basic Raggedy Ann stories. This was my favorite Raggedy Ann book of all time. Raggedy Ann and the Camel with the Wrinkled Knees. And, oh, they have such great pictures in them. Of course, turn on the camera, open the book, can't find them. Wonderful, wonderful illustrations. The illustrator is, it doesn't say, it just says the author. Here is a horse wearing sunglasses. There's an angry little gnome. Wishing Pebble. Happy Meadow. And Friendly Fairies, which is just a collection of fairy stories written by the author, so they're not traditional fairy tales by any means. And they have these beautiful illustrations in them. So, those are, some of the surviving books. And then I kept jotting down books as I kept thinking of them. Of course, Dr. Seuss. In fact, I think Dr. Seuss was what I learned to read from. Good old Green Eggs and Ham and Sam I Am. I think my favorite one of them, for some reason, was One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Blue Fish. There was a series of books when I was a kid, too, called Georgie. I mean, these are all, young grade school books about a little ghost who lived in a house with an old couple, and he was really cute and had a lot of little friends. Let's see, which other ones? As I got, still in elementary school, because you did say childhood, Boxcar Children, Little House on the Prairie. Now, when I looked again with the nieces, there's everybody seems to have expanded to include more people. But these were just the original, starting with Little House in the Big Woods, and moving through maybe until what were they? These Happy Golden Years. I loved the books. I hated the TV program. The TV program seemed sappier and much more contrived, no offense to the fans of the show, than the books. The books were a very straightforward, kind of unsentimental accounting of her life growing up in the time that she did, and I was just fascinated by it. Let's see, what else did I read? Oh, good old Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys. I read both. I had an older cousin who passed his Hardy Boys books down to me, so I read both with equal measure and I've frozen for a moment. Well, I don't know what's going on. Software update. Oh, okay. Never mind, ignore all that. I figured I would grow up and be a detective. Let's see. Oh, I'm remembering Witch of Blackbird Pond. Jade, still in elementary school. It's an author who's written a whole bunch of books. And the only one that comes to mind right now is Jade. And Jade was about a girl who runs off and, gets on a pirate ship and pretends to be a boy. Let's see. Oh, I read the Moomin Troll series. It's by a Norwegian, I think, or Finnish author. Anyhow, I loved that series. Rosemary Sutcliffe wrote a lot of kids' books, but they were historical. Sixth grade, I think I read Chronicles of Narnia and The Hobbit. I was a little older before I started The Lord of the Rings. I probably read Lord of the Rings when I was maybe 7th or 8th grade. And there was not, in the 60s and 70s, quite the same volume of what we would call young adult books today. I read a lot of science fiction, and kind of bridging the gap between kids' books and adult books was an author who is one of my favorite authors of all time, Andre Norton. Andre Norton was a woman. She wrote under the names Andrew North and Andre Norton because at the time, when her first books came out, they were science fiction. I think they were what was called juvenile, which I think juvenile was my equivalent of young adult. And everyone convinced her that if she had a female name, it wouldn't sell. And then she just kept Andre Norton on until she died fairly recently. Towards the end of her life, she paired up with a fantasy writer named Mercedes Lackey. And I discovered her books when I was still in grade school, and I loved them. Some of them were the straightforward, old-fashioned space operas, rocket ships and alien planets. But she also had a lot of fantasy elements mixed in and magical elements mixed in. And, I might even go so far as to say, even though there are other much more sophisticated and complex authors that I read now and love, because she was really the first author that I fell in love with, I must have read every one of those books at least 10 times. I might call her my favorite author just based on the intensity of love I had for her books when I was younger. And I own every one of them. I still have them. Getting into slightly older, but, maybe early teens, I read a lot. I loved historical novels. I loved times and lives that I thought were more interesting than mine. I thought pretty much everybody had a more interesting life than me when I was a kid, but I would go for people who I thought had the really interesting lives, like the kings and queens and princesses and Lucrezia Borgia and all these different things, different people. So I read a lot of Jean Plaidy. She was a writer who did a lot of historical novels, about English royalty and European royalty. Victoria Holt, who I think might have also been Jean Plaidy, I'm not sure. She did romantic suspense that were kind of mysterious. Agatha Christie. My father read Agatha Christie, and I just picked one up when I was about 11 or so and started reading it. And it's a very different world. It's the England of the past, and everyone was always having tea, and Hercule Poirot would solve mysteries with his little gray cells, and I was intrigued with it, and I read that. I think I already talked about books in another video. I loved Anna, I don't know whether you pronounce it Seton or Satan, but she did a whole bunch of historical novels, sort of romances, but not heavy on the romance, not like what you think of as a traditional romance novel today. So I see I've now made 19 minutes of book rambling. I am really sorry about that, but I truly love books, and I have my entire life. And anything I've mentioned, if you can find it, if it's still out there, I think most people would enjoy them. So anyway, thank you, Xanda, for asking that question. I'm sure you're getting more of an answer than you ever expected. Have a great night. Bye.